And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on Deborah Kobylt Live. And have you ever thought of writing a book? And then have you ever thought about how to get it published? Well, we have a really interesting guest. She's been down this road many times. In fact, I think 13 times. Deborah Levine Herman, who wrote this terrific book, second edition, I might add, Spiritual Writing from Inspiration to Publication. Gee, Deborah, thanks for joining us. And your name's quite easy for me to remember today. So thanks.
Yes, two Deborahs. It's
Yeah.
lucky.
Yeah.
Very happy to be here.
Tell us about the book. Why did you decide to put this out as a second edition? And then tell us your background because you are quite versed in this entire area, would you?
Sure. I decided this book first came out in 2001, and it was pioneering at the time because the agents and editors weren't sure how to deal with what they called spiritual. They didn't even call it spiritual material. To them, it was woo-woo material. And so at first I wrote the book to address the needs of writers who were on more of a spiritual path. They were writing about alternative ideas. But it was also a larger purpose to teach these types of writers who are on a bit of a mission how to be professional, how to navigate publishing, and also to integrate this idea that if you're writing a book, you're a messenger and you have a
Yeah.
responsibility to be a good messenger. So that was the original idea. In fact, the original title I was thinking was God Told Me to Write This. And then, the whole idea was don't put that in your letter, even if God did tell you to write it, which I would, I'd have no way to doubt that, because, we were getting a lot of channeled material and, new agey types of things or religious tracts where someone's reinterpreting the Bible. Maybe they can do that, but you're dealing with a different set of people in the publishing industry, and you want them to take you seriously as writing professionals. So that was the original purpose of the book. The reason for a second edition is, fast forward or cut to 20 years later, as they say in film. I changed a great deal 20 years later. I've written more books, had more experiences. Publishing has changed. And perhaps originally my greatest purpose was because of digital marketing. I studied digital marketing. I learned this is a really new opportunity for all writers to level the playing field. Platform
Hmm.
doesn't what it meant, years ago. So there's a lot of there's a lot of new material in this in fact, what am I saying? When I started redoing the book, I literally rewrote, well, I'll say almost every word in the
Hmm.
book.
Right.
It's a completely new it's a new animal because I just plus 20 years later as a writer, you're going to look at yourself and say, no, I could do so much better than I did, then. So that was the primary reason.
So I'm a writer and I want to write a book that I think would be interesting for other people. What do I need to think about in my head? Because maybe it wouldn't be interesting to other people, right? Like, what sort of research do I need to do to have a success sort of at the end of my journey writing so that a publisher would be interested in picking it up? Like, what do I need to know? What are the steps? Give me, let's say, one, two, and three
Great
apps.
question. Great question.
Yeah.
However, I wouldn't
Mm.
wait till you're done and ready to submit your work. I think that process and that mentality of what's in it for the reader and knowing who your reader is should
Mm.
start at the very beginning, particularly with nonfiction. Fiction is very different because of the different genres. If you're a novelist, you need to be aware of who your audience is and go where they hang out and get to know, you can't just look, for example, romance will always be the most lucrative, and the most books are sold in that genre. However, if you're not into romance, you don't read romance. Don't decide, oh, I want to make money, I'm going to go write a romance. It doesn't work that way. You have to be passionate and familiar with whatever genre you choose. So let's get back to nonfiction. The steps that you need to take are figure out, especially I edit books, so I've been editing some memoirs, and people get very lost in the weeds, and they don't realize that if you're writing your story, it's not really this is going to sound funny, it's not about you. There's got to be a reason why someone is going to want to read your story, whether it's to educate themselves, for them to resonate with your journey, for them to learn something, to be inspired, to become motivated. And, a lot of times, especially new writers, will forget that. So, and most people, I think, do want to write their personal stories, at least to begin with. If you're writing about a topic and you want to be very compelling and have a publisher pick you up. Now, we're not talking about platform yet. It's an entirely different animal. We're just talking about how to resonate with readers and make sure your publisher knows that you know. Do research. One way is decide what your underlying topic is and look at keywords. Look at what questions people are asking on the internet. And that's going to give you insight into who your audience is and if there is an audience. Because, especially a long time ago, when I would read query letters, and I read like bazillions of them, when I was actually working as an agent to screen. And, people had no real idea what the end audience was going to be. They would say, all women need to read this, or, all men need to read this. And there was a disconnect. Today, we have the ability to, find out what questions people are actually asking. And if it fits with your topic, then that's your audience, and you can develop. There are ways to reach your audience.
So initially, it's a good idea to go online, just to sum that up, go online and, sort of Google, if you will, what are people interested in, right? Especially if it's a personal memoir, right? As a journalist, I have so many stories that I'm interested, for example, in getting, pen to paper. And I think that's a great idea, or not idea, but a great piece of advice, right? What are people interested? Are they interested in, perhaps how you fell and how you got out of it? I think that's a big one, especially for women of a certain age, right? We're all interested in, like, gosh, I did all this and I crashed. How did she get out of it? I know that's a personal one that I like to read about.
Yes.
So do your research, right? So absolutely
Yes.
know that you will have an audience to read this book. But also, you talked about a query letter, because you mentioned that as well in this book. For those who don't know about a query letter, what should it include, and how can you sort of attract publishers? Because let's face it, I can't imagine how many people get these publishers.
Oh my gosh. And
how do you stand out?
Oh my gosh.
Do you send a teddy bear with it in the mail? I mean, what do you do?
We've had some really interesting submissions. We've had people send us chocolates. We've had people send us amazing gifts. We like them, but that's not going to turn a bad project into one that will represent the key. But I don't mind. I like presents. But the key is first of all, I'm going to back up. If you're going to send out a query letter, you have to have either a manuscript or a book proposal ready.
Right.
Because people play games. I've had people try to call us and say, oh, I have this idea. Would you be interested? No. And we have very long memories. And so if you do not have Okay. So don't write to us and say, oh, I have this great story. Would you be interested? We, and I'm speaking now as a former literary agent, we don't benefit unless we have a project we can sell. Agenting is all done on commission. We don't work for you. We don't owe you anything. You know, a lot of people say, well, I never heard from this literary agency. If it's a really popular agency, they may be getting hundreds of submissions a day, and quite often they'll send a form rejection. It's not personal. There could be a million reasons why your work is rejected. So make sure that you've done your homework. I lay it out in my book from soup to nuts of everything you need to submit. Query letter. Keep it short. Don't use fluffy language and flowery language to try to impress us. If we, you know, I've read letters where by the end of it, I had no idea what the book was about. So get to the point. We, you know, if you are asked to submit information because you've appealed to us that this is an idea, that you are the person to write it, maybe you have some interesting credentials or experience. And if you have what they call a platform, which means what audience you can reach, that you already have people following you, not necessarily all social media, there are other ways to build a platform. If you have an interesting platform or background, that goes in the letter. And, you know, then ask, as you would in any business letter, ask, would you like to see my proposal? Or the first 50 pages of my novel. So treat it as any business letter. We are not, you know, and if you don't know us, don't try to be overly familiar, unless, as long as you're polite, you can be a little funny, but again, don't overdo it, and don't waste the potential agent's time.
You talked about social media, right? Let's face it, that's changed since the first time that you wrote this book. Very briefly, could you tell us, is it something that, for example, someone who is a writer and would like to get published, they should reach out on social media to publishers? Should they instead do research and try and get to know people who would be interested in reading the book? Like, how has social media changed the entire game?
I don't think social media is the best way to reach out to agents and editors. That being said, you can learn about them and what they like. You can go to their websites. You can follow them. That's how to get to know them. But that's not the way to submit. You're going to submit through their submission guidelines, either through mail or through their website. But the purpose of social media for writers is to build engagement with your potential audience and to prove that people want to hear what you have to say. There are techniques to use. Sometimes it's a numbers game, but there are ways to inflate numbers so that they don't translate into engagement. And what you want as a person using a social media strategy is engagement, because you could have all these. That's why I went back to school to learn about social media strategy and digital marketing strategy, because it was the Wild West when it first started. And I was confused and frustrated, you know, buy 10,000 likes. That's not going to have any meaning. If you have
if anything, that gets you buried. People remember that it gets you buried, because the platforms, they sort of know it. And I've tried to tell friends that it'll get you buried. Don't do that. You're better off with a few hundred, right? Even some of your friends to start out with. Make it organic.
So that's organically, and by sharing good content, and by caring about who's following you and trying to respond. And it's different. It used to be everything was push advertising. But it was. And it shifted to where we want to trust other people's opinions. And that's when social media became the way to learn and to build they call it a funnel, toward the end sale. So you're building trust with people by giving them good content. And, you don't want, I always tell people with social media, you can announce things. Like I was announcing a wonderful interview today, but think about it as like going to a party. You don't walk into a party and say, I wrote this book, buy my book. It's just, it's, you wouldn't have many friends. So instead you want to give good content, create relationships, and then you can tell people, oh, by the way, I have this great book coming out.
That's a great, if I may, that's a great piece of advice. Build relationships.
Yes.
That's with anything. That's with friendship. That's with where you go to work. And that's what's getting your book out there. It's about, as you said, the good content. Sometimes the old-fashioned stuff is still working, even in a modern world, right? Build good content, build relationships, one human being at a time, and just get it out there. I have advertisers on my show, and they're looking more for who are your viewers and listeners, as opposed to, oh, look, she's got 1 million of them. A lot of times the million of those people are just zooming by. And I do think that is more important. So another great point for people. You can use the social media, learn about people, but build the content. That's what matters. What about self-publishing, right? Let's say you decided to skip the whole thing with publishers and then get yourself a PR agent to get it out there. What about that?
It depends, because the problem with self-publishing, now I have an indie hybrid company.
Right.
The reason that we set it up that way is through the agency, we were seeing some really good projects that we would have sold 10 years ago. They're not being picked up by the publishers. There's a higher threshold among the big five for what they will take. If you want to sell a book to a big five publisher, quite often they want to know that they're going to sell like 20,000 in the first printing. That's a lot of books. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to get past the gatekeepers and qualify for that. Many of you will, but more of you will not. The problem with self-publishing and just hiring a publicist and a marketing person is if you're skimping on the quality of the book. A bad book, it doesn't matter how good your marketing is, because people will share, I didn't like this book. And what you really want is to put, especially if you're going to be, spending money, pay for a good editor. That's really important. A good editor. That doesn't mean, friends and family. You've got to have someone who's professional and who's been in the trenches. And at that point, you also want to make sure that your design work is professional, because if a book looks self-published, it will be treated as such. And, self-publishing can be very beneficial, but there's ease of access to the online platforms. And if you are not putting all your energy into building your own access to your tribes and your engagement, and you're not also focusing on the quality of your work, then you're going to just sit there. And statistically, self-published books sell maybe 10 copies, but it doesn't have to be that way. If you really want to do this and you feel that there's an audience for your work, then start with make it a step-by-step. Focus on the quality of the book, make sure it's great, find a team of people who can help you make it professional. Then of course, having a publicist in any situation is going to help you, because when you say get your book out.
When you say a team of people, you're talking an editor, et cetera, right? And how would people find that if they've never done this before? How would they find those editors? Where do you look for them? Would they go to somebody like you? Let's talk about that.
Well, they certainly could. I have a company where I can connect people to editors that I have vetted, but there are great organizations that have high quality editors. My husband writes a book every year called Jeff Herman's Guide to Book Editors, Publishers, and Literary Agents that's just out now. And his book lists editors. I also have a social network, writersnetworking.com, and there are a lot of editors, professional editors also listed there. But you need to not just go with the first one, unless it's someone that has a lot of recommendation. And, you know, in my spiritual writing book, I talk about these lessons. One of them is self-protection, especially for eager writers, because there are people who will look at you and say, money. And you have to be really vigilant in comparing what are you actually getting for your money. And then this is just part of your job, is to that they're giving you distribution. They're not.
Let's talk a little bit briefly before we let you go. Your background is quite extensive. 13 books. You are a best-selling author, of course, a spiritual teacher, mystic, animal communicator. I like this. What did you say about dogs and horses? Explain the differences very quickly.
Dogs like to complain. And they're really, so they are, just as you would expect, they're very emotional. They pick up on your emotions. Just briefly, I had a dog like pull his owner across the street to me. And then, of course, I had the embarrassing moment of, oh, by the way, I'm an animal communicator. Do you want me to tell you? And what's so funny is, it is funny, because what's so funny is these real dog lovers don't think anything of it. And it's like, I'm talking to your dog, isn't it? It's just funny to me. But this one dog said to please tell his owner that he was no longer sick and that she was driving him crazy with worry. And to it was quite amazing, because he had Lyme disease, and it was like, I'm not dying, please stop, you know. And so that was.
Did you tell the owner? Did you tell the owner? Did you say, look, he's sick of you worrying about him? Would you knock it off? So then what did the owner say?
She laughed, and she actually started to cry because she was so worried about losing her little fur baby.
That
it
really.
It was very rewarding. Horses are truly my best. I have now my second horse. My first horse really taught me that I was indeed experiencing animal communication. First, it started with dreams, and then I could hear him as if I were talking to you.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're very. Oh my gosh, horses are very intelligent. They are still horses. I mean, I can know why a horse is doing something, and unless I use actual training, I may not be able to get them to not do it.
Interesting. Wow. Really. I just want to keep adding to the list of who you are, but that's quite interesting. I found that one amusing.
Yes, it is very amusing.
But fascinating at the same time, because I believe in that. You know, I do believe that people can communicate. They're living beings, just like we are. Former literary agent, as you said, lawyer, indie publisher, digital marketing strategist. In other words, you combine all of this experience into helping others get their message out so that others will enjoy what it is that they have to say. I find that really fascinating. Can you talk to us about some of your really well-known subjects that you've written about? And just briefly, if you want to list them.
Well, I learned the most from writing Member of the Family, which is the memoir of the youngest member of the Manson family cult. I had studied a dual degree of journalism and law when I was young, and always wanted to write creative nonfiction. But I wrote other books. They were reviewed as self-help, and I really cut my teeth and wrote a lot of books. I wrote a funny mothering book, but this one really challenged me. And I learned about pacing and structure, even beyond what I thought I already knew. And I'm working on other books now and learning how these books relate also to the spiritual path. The authors, at least with Member of the Family, my co-author, whose story it was, Diane Lake, we went through a spiritual journey together of helping to heal, for her to heal and to unpack all of her trauma. And if you talk about trauma, I mean, being with Charles Manson for the two years plus, then being stuck with them in the desert, when after she finds out inadvertently that they had committed the crimes, and then ultimately she testified against them. People don't necessarily realize that's a spiritual book, because the journey was a spiritual journey. It was triumph over all of these challenges, and she really walks her talk, and she believes that, you know, and whatever people believe God is, I don't, even in my spiritual writing book, I don't define that for you, but she really felt that God had to be watching over her, because there were so many times that she could have died. And
very interesting.
Yeah. So, you know, I want people to understand spiritual writing doesn't have to be about spiritual subjects. And as you learn to be a messenger and get your ego out of the way, you know, you're going to bring important energy and information. And we've had so many positive reviews for that book. At first, people may be attracted to the idea that it's about Manson, but he really factors very little in the ultimate story. It's really Diane's story, and a story of survival. I'm working on other projects now that are along, you know, along the same type of vein. I'm very excited. I'm going to be working with a couple who have autistic children, and they've it's too early to really give full detail, but they have a center. They're a remarriage, and each of them has autistic children.
Interesting.
And they both have very interesting backgrounds. So I'm losing the thread of your original question.
That's okay. Honestly, your entire journey into writing and interpreting is so interesting. I can honestly follow your train of thought quite easily. So I appreciate
good.
that.
I'm so glad. I did want to say one last thing though about my writing journey. I have a lot of acquired talents through study and work and experience, but I finally have been able to use my gifts, my spiritual gifts, to intuitively work with some authors to bring out what their real story is. And to be able to look at it, you know, for example, I've been working with one author on a very interesting story, but I couldn't figure it out. It was like a puzzle. And I finally realized she still has more healing to do. And until some of that happens, she can't write the book. You know, she's stuck.
That is very interesting. Hence the title of the book, Spiritual Writing. There's a lot that goes into it. That spirituality, I mean, she probably didn't quite realize that she had a story to tell, but is still in the grieving process to whatever it is that happened to her, and can't quite get to the other side. That's actually very interesting. So folks who want to work with you, they have an idea. You will work with them, right? One-on-one. Tell us again briefly about what you do and how people can get in touch with you.
Right now, they can reach me through soulodyseybooks.com. I have Micro Publishing Media, is my author services company. I will not work with just, I mean, I have to select a project that will resonate with me, because it's such an intimate relationship that, you know, the author needs to also find that I'm a good guide for them. And if a person has a manuscript, I can do the kind of the overview. I call it an assessment to let them know what's working, what's not working. And sometimes we dig deeper. And I did this with a book that's coming out in the spring with one author. We thought he was writing one book, but as we dug a little bit, we realized it was a different story altogether. And so that's part of the process of what I do with authors, is to help them find their story and know what their mission is. So that's
very interesting. So I imagine look you up on the website, and I suppose you would answer them, of course, if someone wrote to you and said, "I have an idea. I'm interested in doing this."
Yes. I can give my email, but it's Deborah at micropublishingmedia.com, which is a little bit, you may need to post it somewhere because people mix it up. But that is my business email, and I will always answer someone. Typically I'll set up a chat and find out what are your goals and how I can help you. And if I'm not the person to help you, I will be happy to tell you where to go. No, that doesn't sound right. I'll be happy to tell you how to find the way to reach your goals. That's kind of my new mission.
I fully understood what you meant. And by the way,
I know, but my subconscious has a sense of humor of its own.
And by the way, Deborah in your email is spelled the way I spell mine, Deborah. So often people spell my name the wrong way. It's like, no, it's the long way. So please remember that also when you're emailing Deborah. And I really appreciate you coming on today. Please pick up the book, Spiritual Writing. I enjoyed it very much. I love the undertones of not just getting a story out there, but understanding spiritually what's going on with you on the inside, that you need to get this story out. It's a different take on writing, on beginning the process, and also once you feel like you're down the road on publishing as well. It's a comprehensive book, so please pick it up. Spiritual Writing with Deborah Levine Herman. And everybody, thanks for joining us today on our show, Deborah Kobylt Live. You can find us on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram, and then of course we put it out there as an audio podcast as well. So wherever you get those podcasts, just look us up, Deborah Kobylt Live. We'll be there for you. Thanks again for joining us, and thank you, Deborah. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.